Last year, I rewatched the hit CW show, The Vampire Diaries, for the first time since I was a teenager watching it premiere in 2009. And it was a great time, although I did only get halfway through season 6. But it brought back to me all my memories of reading the books when I was, I guess, about 13, and all I wanted to read all the time was vampire books. I can remember some weird snippets of things in the books. I can remember angels, I can remember Japanese fox spirits, and I can remember different dimensions. But it was all very vague, and I wanted a full spoilery deep dive. I wanted to relive the books. And I couldn't find anything. And the subreddit was full of posts about whether the books were worth it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to reread these books and I'm going to make a video about it. And 2 months later, we are here. So welcome. Grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and enjoy the ride. Now, we do have to do a little bit of housekeeping first, because there is a bit of lore behind the book series. I have made a PowerPoint, and it is going to make its first appearance right about now. So the original series was a set of 4 books written by L.J. Smith, and these were named The Awakening, The Struggle, The Fury, and Dark Reunion. And they were published between 1991 and 1992. Although L.J. Smith is the author, she actually doesn't own the copyright to the characters or the story, which will become relevant. The publisher, HarperCollins, wanted a new young adult vampire romance series and approached what's called a book packaging agency called Alloy Entertainment. They then hired L.J. Smith to write it. So from what I can tell, she came up with the characters, the plot, the story, but unfortunately was not the owner of the copyright. Nevertheless, in 2009 to 2011, she was rehired to write a sequel trilogy called The Return Trilogy, which include Nightfall, Shadow Souls, and Midnight. Obviously, this is around the time that the show premiered and became a massive hit, and I'm sure L.J. Smith did feel a little element of job security, knowing that her creations were making a hell of a lot of money, although I'm not sure how much she was seeing of that, which is kind of sad to think about. Following the success, she planned out a new trilogy that was going to publish in 2011 to 2012, and this was called the Hunters Trilogy. This is all slightly alleged, but it's pretty accepted that the publishers did not agree with her plot direction in this trilogy. It seemed that she was Team Damon and the publishers was Team Stefan, which is ironic considering the show. They ended up firing her in 2011, which, although technically wasn't legally wrong because they did own the books, is pretty scummy behaviour considering that she had created these best-selling books that were, like I said, making them a lot of money. A lot of fans of the series stood with L.J. Smith and refused to continue reading the series from this point. I can't say I was one of them, mainly because I had no idea any of this was going on. The book still had her name on the cover, albeit with a little created by tag. Now, in a weird twist of fate, Kindle had created a platform at the time that was called Kindle Worlds and was aimed at self-publishing fan fiction using licenses. Therefore, you could make money from your fan fiction. Weirdly, Alloy Entertainment was one of the only companies that agreed to this licensing deal. So in 2014, L.J. Smith was actually able to self-publish her version of the Vampire Diaries series as fan fiction, and she might have made some money from it. Her continuation was called the Eversong series and comprised of Paradise Lost, The Second War of the Roses, and Into the Woods, although unfortunately the third book was never released. Kindle Worlds closed down in 2018 and they are not actually available anywhere officially anymore, although I have found the 2 books that were published on the Internet Archive. So if or when we get to that point, maybe a little side quest will be necessary. Like I said, sadly, L.J. Smith never published her 3rd book in the Evensong series, and even more sadly, she passed away last year. She had so many books that I was obsessed with as a teen, including the Night World series, The Secret Circle, and The Forbidden Game, so I hope she did know what her work meant to a lot of people out there, and I hope she rests in peace. Back to the officially published books. The Hunters Trilogy were the next published books. They were written by an uncredited ghostwriter who to this day is unknown, and these were Phantom, Moonsong, and Destiny Rising, and they were released as planned in 2011 to 2012. And then finally, we have the Salvation Trilogy. So this was written by a different ghostwriter called Aubrey Clark. These are called Unseen, Unspoken, and Unmasked, and they were released in 2013 to 2014. Just for completionist's sake, there are actually another 6 novels published that were the Stefan's Diaries series. These were written by a ghostwriter as well, and they were based purely on the TV show. So they do differ to the other book series. They follow Stefan and Damon's story from when they met Catherine. I've never read those, but they were published between 2010 and 2012 alongside the TV show. So in this video, I'm planning to talk you through the 4 original books written by L.J. Smith in the 1990s. I have them here. But if you would like me to continue and read the rest, I probably will if one person asks, because I am so intrigued to know what happens next after reading these 2. So first, we do need to start with a bit of a character breakdown because there are a lot of differences to the TV show. Back with my PowerPoint. So first we have our main 3 characters, and of course, the love triangle. Although I will say Damon has been much less present in the books as he is in the show. I also should maybe say at this point, there will be spoilers for the books and probably the TV show to an extent, because I will be comparing it to the TV show in some aspects. If you don't want spoilers, this is not the video for you. So through the first 3 books, we switch between Elena and Stefan's POV. So first we have Elena Gilbert. In the books, she has pale golden hair, pale skin, and dark blue eyes. She's known as the Ice Queen and is generally pretty unlikable through the first few books, although she did grow on me as the story went on. But I know not many people agree with that. A lot of people do not like her in the books. She's very much giving Caroline in season 1 of the show. She's popular, she has kind of mean girl energy, pretty shallow and selfish. I guess it just didn't bother me that much. I like reading from unlikable female characters to this day, so maybe I'm just a good audience for that kind of character. But yeah, she's pretty unlikable. Then we have Stefan Salvatore. He is very similar to show Stefan in looks and personality. He's Italian, he's very handsome, he's brooding, full of self-hatred and guilt and misery. He's kind of whingy and boring. I feel like I can count on the one hand how many times he is described as happy or smiling. Also, on a side note, the voice he has in the audiobooks is absolutely diabolical. He genuinely sounds 500 years old, and it's very painful to listen to. Stefan has an older brother called Damon Salvatore. Also quite similar to the show, except I would say he's a lot more cruel. He's much more powerful than Stefan because he drinks human blood. And like I said, very cruel, definitely starts off as the main antagonist, kind of similar to the show, but without much of I guess he doesn't have as much of the charm as show Damon. He redeems himself a little bit later, but he is pretty evil at the beginning. They have a similar dynamic in that they hate each other, but both feel drawn to Elena. And they have a similar history in that they were both turned into vampires by a girl called Catherine, who looks very similar to Elena. However, in the books, Catherine is German, and her full name is Catherine von Schwarzschild. She was turned by a vampire called Klaus, and in the flashbacks that we get in book 1, she is honestly awful. She is weak, she is childish, she's emotional, she's very sensitive. I think Catherine in the show is much cooler, personally. Then we get to Elena's friends. In the show, her main friends are Bonnie and Caroline. The book is a little different in that her best friends are Bonnie and Meredith, although Caroline is also present in the books. The Bonnie in the show, I think, seems to be a mix of Bonnie and Meredith in the books. So first we have Bonnie McCullough. She has curly red hair, brown eyes, and is very girly. She's boy obsessed, she's kind of silly goofy, and easily spooked. She isn't super confident, but she can be strong when she needs to be. In the book, she is descended from druids, which is where she gets her psychic powers. Meredith is Elena's other best friend. She has olive skin, dark hair, and generally is very mysterious and quite aloof. She's always very confident and chilled out. She never seems to stress under pressure. She stays very calm. And I would say out the 2, she's probably Elena's best friend. She's very loyal. Then we do still have a Caroline Forbes in the book. She is pretty much Elena's nemesis in a mean girl kind of way. They have been friends for years, but Caroline is very jealous and is much more of an antagonist than she is in the show. She hates Elena, really hates her. And in the book, she has green eyes and auburn hair. And then other friends include Matt. So in the book, Matt is called Matt Honeycutt. He is very similar to the show. Blonde hair, blue eyes, all American is how he's described. He loves Elena, would do anything for her. He's just painfully human, although I do think he calls it like he sees it, which sometimes makes me like him, but most of the time I do find him pretty annoying in the books. We have Tyler Smallwood. Yes, his name in the book is Tyler Smallwood. I understand why they changed it to Tyler Lockwood in the show. He's not really, I wouldn't say he's a friend of Elena, but he's quite a key player in these books. He's a jock, he's pretty nasty, very laddie, and just generally a pretty awful guy. We do have a Vicky Bennett, but she's not Matt's sister, but she does play quite a key role. She's like a quiet girl at school who the main girls don't know too much about, really, until later books. Elena's family is also slightly different. We have Aunt Judith, who is like Aunt Jenna in the show, except older and I would say less cool. She's pretty old-fashioned, she's kind, she's very anxious. She's engaged to a man called Robert, and instead of a younger brother called Jeremy, Elena has a little sister who is 4 years old and is called Margaret. So that is our characters sorted. So we can start with book 1. This is called The Awakening, and I'm going to read you the blurb. Elena Gilbert is used to getting what she wants, and she wants the mysterious new boy at school, Stefan. Then she discovers he has a brother and that these siblings are hiding a deadly secret, a secret that will change Elena's life forever. I feel like we all know what that is. So before we start, I do need to warn you, these books aren't good. As in, they are not critically acclaimed writing. They are designed for young adults. They are designed to be kind of cringy. It's like when you read Tumblr posts from when you were a teenager and something that seemed so profound at the time, you look at now as an adult and you're like, what? Like, we are not expecting Pulitzer Prize winning writing here. But did I enjoy them? I'm not ashamed to admit that I did. They are a guilty pleasure. They are funny. They're not that badly written. I am excited to tell you about them. This isn't going to be a review full of hate, although there is a lot in here that I could criticise. But it's mostly we're just going to walk through what happens so you don't have to reread them if you don't want to. And we're going to start with book 1. We open on the 4th of September in a place called Fells Church. It's not Mystic Falls like it is in the show. We live in Fells Church. We open with an iconic line, "Dear Diary, something awful is going to happen today." So Elena is writing in her diary and she's talking about feeling scared and lost. She's just gotten home from a holiday in France with her Aunt Judith and her little sister Margaret, and she is missing her mum and dad. She's described as cool, blonde and slender. She is a fashion trendsetter, the high school senior and the girl every boy wanted and every girl wanted to be. So she gets ready and leaves to go to school, but immediately gets all these bad feelings again, all the anxiety and the fear, and she notices a crow watching her. She throws a stone at the crow, it flies off, and she heads to school. We then move to Stefan's POV, who has just finished eating a rabbit. He has accidentally killed it, and he is classic Stefan, feeling about how he just wants to be normal. He's not sure why he's come to Fells Church, but he just wants to try and have a normal life. He has been living in the shadows in Italy, and he just wants to try being normal. Now, for me, if I was hundreds of years old and a vampire, the last thing I would want to do is go to high school, but that is what he's decided to do. Back to Elena. She gets to school, meets Caroline, Bonnie and Meredith, and she's really missed them, although Caroline does greet her very coolly. Bonnie talks about how she's learned palm reading over the summer, and she is sort of joking around and pretending to read Elena's palm when she suddenly goes blank-faced and her eyes unfocus. Meredith jokes, "Oh, is she going to meet a tall, dark stranger?" And Bonnie says, "Dark, yes, and a stranger, but not tall, although he was tall once." They all sort of brush it off and start laughing, and then Stefan pulls up in a Porsche. Way to fit in and be normal, Stefan. And all the girls are like, "Whoa, look at this hottie that's just showed up." Elena follows him. This whole crowd follows her. It's very weird. It's like lemmings. And she's watching Stefan, and she notices, it's kind of like in the first episode of the show, she notices he is talking to the admissions secretary, and he takes his glasses off, and her like demeanor changes, and she gives Stefan some papers and a class schedule. He walks straight by Elena without looking at her, and she's pretty annoyed about that because no boy has ever ignored her before. She thinks about Matt and how she thought they would be together, but over the summer she's realised that she loves him as a brother, and she has to tell him that it's over between them. Her and Caroline have a little argument. Caroline says something really cringy about how Elena's time on the throne is running out. And then Elena gets all her minions to find out more about Stefan, learns his name, that he's from Italy, and that he's boarding in the boarding house with Mrs. Flowers on the edge of town. There's no Salvatore house in the book. Back to Stefan. He's not having a very good day. It's been a long time since he's been around so many people, and the pressure of all these minds is making him really tired. In his last period, he's in the same class as Elena, and he sees her for the first time and is pretty shocked because she looks so similar to Catherine. But Catherine is dead, and no one knows that better than he does. Elena smiles at him, but he sort of panics because he doesn't want to think about Catherine, and sort of just rejects her and ignores her. He does the same thing as in the show, where Mr. Tanner is asking a girl a bunch of questions she doesn't know the answer to, and he's being quite rude, and Stefan speaks up and corrects him about something quite rudely back. And then Elena watches him leave at the end of class, and she thinks she'd have him, even if it killed her. Even if it killed both of them, she would have him. I feel like you're seeing what I mean about the slight cringiness. We then have our first flashback, where Stefan is thinking about the past. It's a time when his brother Damon told his father that he was quitting university, and his father flies into a rage, and then Catherine comes in. Catherine had arrived in Italy from Germany in the hopes that the countryside would help her recover from a prolonged illness, and Stefan fell in love with her straight away. However, he notices Catherine is smiling at Damon in the same way that she smiles at Stefan, and he realises in that moment that he hates his brother. Elena finishes school, and she meets up with Matt and tells him she just wants to be friends. He takes it pretty nobly, although he asks if it has something to do with the new boy, and although Elena denies it, he knows that she wants him. The next day, she's waiting to ambush Stefan before class, and he suddenly appears, and two jocks named Tyler, who we know, and a guy called Dick, stand in his way and make fun of his Italian accent. But Matt backs up Stefan and invites him to join the football team. Elena tries to talk to Stefan again. He fully rejects her. It's pretty embarrassing. So after school, she's really upset, and she goes to visit her mum and dad at the graveyard at the edge of town over Wickery Bridge. Meredith and Bonnie arrive, and Bonnie tells them that she knew Elena was at the cemetery because she's descended from the Druids and she's psychic, but the girls kind of just laugh at her and they're just kind of joking about it. Elena says she's going to come up with a plan to get Stefan, and the girls do a sort of blood oath to swear to help Elena with anything to do with Stefan, which seems convenient. They realise it's gotten dark, so they start to walk home, but they're all cold and a bit creeped out until Bonnie suddenly stops, and she does this thing again where her eyes go wide and blank, and she starts speaking in a voice that isn't her own, saying, "Elena, something is waiting out there for you." They feel something move, and the girls all scream and run for Wickery Bridge. Elena somehow knows that whatever it is cannot follow them over the bridge, and they make it across, but they're all super freaked out and they all go home pretty quickly. We switch to Stefan's POV, and it turns out he was watching the girls in the graveyard, and he notices that this big burst of power has chased them. Although in the show they call it compulsion, in the books that doesn't exist, but it's called power with a capital P, and all the different powers they have are forms of this power. So Stefan had sensed this power in the graveyard, but he couldn't work out what was causing it. So after he made sure Elena and the others were on their way home safely, he picked up Elena's ribbon that had fell from her hair. And he's basically just talking about how he can't bear being around her, it's too much, he can't stop thinking about her blood, and in that moment he is desperate for her blood and ends up feeding on an old man that's living under Wickery Bridge. And he also has another little flashback to Catherine, and Catherine telling him how she can go out in the sun because she has a lapis ring, and she became a vampire when she was very ill, and her maid brought a man called Klaus to her room who turned her into a vampire. Elena's plan to get Stefan is interesting. She tells the whole school that she's dating an older French boy in secret, and she's not interested in Stefan in the slightest. We then have another diary entry. It's a few weeks later. It's the 26th of September now. She's writing in her diary that everyone has forgotten she ever liked Stefan. Caroline has dropped off the map, and Elena never sees her anymore. And then she writes 3-4 pages about how she can't stop thinking about Stefan, she can't eat, she can't focus on anything else. She is literally obsessed. She noticed him watching her a few times in class, but no one knows anything about him, and he avoids nearly everyone. But she says he seems miserable, like he's behind a wall that he's keeping up. She convinces Matt to make sure Stefan comes to the homecoming dance next week, and she as she's been announced as homecoming queen, she knows if she asks him to dance, he won't be able to refuse her in front of everyone. She arrives at the dance looking beautiful and goes to ask Stefan to dance. And as she's saying it, she notices she feels quite frightened, like intrinsically deep down, her heart is pounding and she feels like there's danger, but she can't work out why. However, Stefan seems resigned to the fact he has to dance with her. So he goes to take her hand, but then Caroline sidles up and puts her arm through Stefan's. She says she wants to keep Stefan's dances to herself, and they move away from Elena. And Elena is humiliated. She heads to the bathroom, and Meredith and Bonnie try and gently suggest that she should probably move on from Stefan, but she gets pretty angry, she's pretty nasty to them, and she storms off. And then she kind of dances and flirts with everyone, especially Tyler, and Tyler and his friends suggest they go to the cemetery to drink, and Elena agrees, and she ends up in a car with Tyler, Dick, and a girl called Vicky Bennett. Elena and the others have arrived at the ruined church, which is in the cemetery, and they go inside, and she feels pretty uneasy and wrong about this, but she doesn't want to admit it. They all look at the tomb on the side of the church, which belongs to Thomas and Honoria Fell. So Thomas and Honoria Fell were the alleged founders of Fell's church. The others are messing around and trying to open the tomb when Elena leans on it and it shifts and she nearly falls inside and she's screaming, and then when she opens her eyes, she's outside again. And when they go and look inside, the tomb is still firmly closed and hasn't been opened. Elena tells Tyler she wants to go back to the dance, but Dick and Vicky say they want to stay. Tyler persuades Elena to look at his grandfather's headstone, and even though she does desperately want to leave, she humours him, hoping he'll take her back soon. When they get there, Tyler starts to come on to her, and although she tells him to stop, he continues, and he kisses her and she bites his hand viciously. And then he immediately stops joking around, looks angry, and she thinks this is it. So in the show, they kept in this essay, but it was towards Vicky. And I just don't get why, because in the books, Tyler doesn't get a redemption arc like in the show. In the show, he becomes a main character that we're meant to be empathetic with. I don't know why they even included that in the show. It's just a strange decision. Anyway, we go to Stefan's POV. And Stefan has followed Elena to the cemetery. He's pretty terrified of being there because although he could have sworn he didn't kill that old man, he can't really remember and it all feels like a blur. But he can feel Elena is in distress. And although he feels so weak, he knows if he wants to help Elena, he can't be weak. And so he goes into the ruined church. And it's sort of implied that he's going to go and drink Vicky and Dick's blood. We switch to Elena. Elena's about to scream when something picks Tyler off her and throws him across the graveyard, and she sees it's Stefan. And she says he looks so terrifying that she's suddenly more scared of him than Tyler. Stefan attacks Tyler pretty brutally and repeatedly until Elena shouts his name and he sort of jolts back to himself and puts Tyler down. He offers to drive Elena home, but they go back to the boarding house first to get Stefan's car, and Elena sees inside for the first time. And then Elena kind of has a bit of I think she's quite angry and frustrated, and she has a bit of a go at him about how he's been treating her and asking why he hates her. What has she done? What has she done wrong? And he basically tells her that he doesn't hate her, but she reminds him of someone he used to know. It was a girl who looked like her but wasn't really similar in any other way, and who died. And as he's telling her, she reaches out to hold his hand, and he sort of his face sort of crumbles in defeat and resignation, and he leans down and they kiss. Bearing in mind, this is their first real conversation, and it was because he saved her from being assaulted. It's just an interesting choice. Meanwhile, Matt, Meredith and Bonnie have come to try and find Elena, and they run into Vicky, who is bleeding from her neck and looking confused and terrified and stumbling around on the road. They ask her what happens, but she just talks about eyes and mist and something coming to get them. And although they want to carry on looking for Elena, they know they need to get her home and call the police. We switch back and Stefan and Elena are just kissing. Elena feels so happy and so much love, and she says they don't even need words, they just understand each other. And then after a while, they decide to drive back to Elena's. They're holding hands, but they notice police lights at her house. And when Elena walks in, Aunt Judith cries and asks her where she's been. They explain to her that Vicky was found. Apparently Dick wasn't attacked but can't remember a thing, and Vicky is still hysterical. And she notices Stefan has gone very still and asks where Vicky was attacked. When he hears it was in the church, he says he has to go, and he's clearly freaking out that he attacked Vicky, again without remembering it. And Elena tells the others what Tyler did. When Stefan leaves, he drives home and he has another flashback about Catherine. He asks Catherine why she spends so much time with Damon, and he realises that she's also told Damon her secret about being a vampire, which really hurts him. They argue about who she should choose to be with and tell her she has to decide, and she asks them to give her till Sunday to make her choice. Elena and Meredith and Bonnie go over to Vicky's house to check on her, but when Elena tries to talk to her, she screams and panics, shouting that Elena is evil, and they are sent home by her mum. And so they go to the boarding house to see Stefan. Meredith and Bonnie wait downstairs while Elena goes up, and she kisses him and tells him she loves him. Just to be clear, they've had one conversation. She's known about him for a month. They've had one conversation. Anyway, it's now the 7th of October. We've gone forward a little bit in time. Elena's writing in her diary again, mostly about how much she loves Stefan. And even though she can sense he feels the same way about her, he's not said it back, and he's still holding back a lot. Elena, Meredith and Bonnie are planning the haunted house fundraiser, and they stay late after school, and Bonnie suggests including the druids with a human sacrifice using one of the teachers. So I think the idea is it's like this big haunted house and guests like move through the different rooms and it's all different scary stuff. While they're working, the lights go off and Meredith and Bonnie go and try and find the janitor, leaving Elena alone in the gym. Elena is pretty terrified. She can feel someone watching her in the dark, and she screams when a figure materializes, but is relieved to see it's just a guy, which I don't know why she's relieved about that. That is not what I would want to see materialize out of the dark. She asks where he came from, and he seems pretty amused, and she gets a bit annoyed at his he's pretty just like laughing at her. And then as he gets closer to her, she feels herself sort of like losing herself a bit. She gets lost in his eyes and she starts to like lean in, and then she snaps out of it and reels back, and she can't believe she was about to kiss this stranger. And then she tells him to leave, and he seems surprised, but he does. Elena spends the next week working on the haunted house, and Meredith and Elena go round to Bonnie's for a sleepover. They talk a bit about Stefan, and she says she just wishes she knew why he was holding back, and she wishes she knew if they were going to be together forever. And Bonnie suggests a spell that will tell you who you're going to marry. So although Elena's a bit like, this sounds a bit weird, she decides to go like, what's the worst that can happen? And just before midnight, she's standing in the dining room in the dark, and they set the table for one with a single candle. And when it hits midnight, she's supposed to pull the chair out and invite her future husband to sit down. So when she does so, the candle blows out and she can feel a gust of wind from the back door, even though she was sure they were locked. And then she hears a voice and realizes it's the same guy that was in the gym that she nearly kissed. And she becomes angry again, telling him to leave. But then she starts to feel dizzy, and when he kisses her hand, she starts to forget why he needs to leave. But suddenly, again, she snaps out of it and forces him to leave and locks the door behind him. When she returns to Meredith and Bonnie, they find out Bonnie's dog has been attacked and is dead, and Elena's diary is missing. We have another quick flashback of Stefan's. He's eating a deer in the woods and is thinking about Catherine. So the night before she had to make her decision about whether she was going to pick Stefan or Damon, she came to him, and for the first time she drank his blood and he drank hers in return. We then move forward to the night of the haunted house. Elena has bought a vintage Italian Renaissance dress as a surprise for Stefan. But when he sees her, instead of looking happy, he looks pretty shocked and sort of draws away from her, which is pretty awkward. They arrive at school and Elena is immediately trying to like sort out chaos and stuff. And apparently Mr. Tanner is refusing to be the human sacrifice in Bonnie's druid area. But then Stefan steps forward and talks to him quietly, and he agrees, in which Elena finds a little bit unsettling that he could convince him to do that. Obviously, we know he compelled him. The night begins and people are all enjoying it until Bonnie notices that Mr. Tanner isn't jumping up to scare the guests, and as she walks over to see why he's not doing anything, she realises he's dead and starts to scream. Elena rushes over there and gets a light on and tells someone to call an ambulance and the police. She tries to usher all the children out, but Tyler argues that no one should leave until they know what happens. And then Tyler starts to sort of shout out that it was Stefan who did this. He says he saw him arguing with Mr. Tanner earlier in the evening and no one knows anything about him. But he moved to Fells Church right as all these violent attacks started happening. And although Elena and Matt both try to defend Stefan, the crowd sort of gets whipped up into this like crazed frenzy, and they decide to try and find Stefan. Elena's panicking and Matt runs off to try and warn Stefan. The police arrive and Elena eventually manages to escape and she heads to the boarding house. She knocks and there's no answer, so she heads upstairs, finds the door unlocked, and the room is like ransacked. It looks as if like there's been something has blown through, leaving everything in chaos. And then she's just about to leave when she notices a trap door to the roof was open, and she climbs up and she sees a figure sat there. But when he turns round, she freezes because she sees that he's crouched and feeding on a white dove with blood around his mouth and on his bared teeth. And in her panic and rush to get away, she stumbles and falls off the roof. But she finds herself being caught and gently cradled as Stefan lands with a thud, and she feels so tired and overwhelmed that she's not even scared anymore. And she looks at him, sees how alone he is, and she feels pity for him, and then he leads her back into the house. So that seems like a really easy... She's accepted that really quickly. She's like, well, he did save me from falling off the roof, so he's all right. So they talk. She knows he's strong and quick, and Stefan explains it's because he's a hunter. She says he can still eat other things, but he says he doesn't need to. In reality, all he needs is blood. He explains that he was born in the 15th century. He tells her all about his life as a human, including his brother Damon. He tells her about Catherine and the ring she gave him that means he can go out in the sunlight. And he tells her what happened to Catherine after she came to his room and they shared blood. So we're back in a flashback. Stefan assumes that means Catherine has chosen him and he's really happy. So when all three of them meet that evening as discussed, Catherine actually has a ring for each of them and both of the boys are confused. And then she explains that she also went to Damon the night before too, and that all three of them will be together forever and be happy. The two boys refuse and say it has to be one or the other because they hate each other, and she runs away crying. That night, Stefan can feel changes already happening to him. He can see better in the dark, and at dinner, the food doesn't help with his hunger. Him and Damon both end up trying to look for Catherine, but the maid tells them she went out for an early morning walk and was very upset. They both run to search the gardens and they end up finding Catherine's dress with a bunch of ashes and her ring. And so she'd taken her ring off and exposed herself to the sunlight. She left a note saying she'd done it to bring them together as she felt it was her fault they hated each other. And Stefan remembers him and Damon going crazy, fighting, saying terrible things to each other, and they both got their swords and fought, eventually killing each other. Stefan then woke up in his tomb, but they'd both had enough of Catherine's blood in their system to turn into vampires rather than die. And Damon runs off. He explains to Elena that Damon is stronger than him because he drinks human blood, and he explains about the power that blood, especially human blood, gives them. So they can be more strong, faster, they can read people's minds, and they can control people's minds, and they have the ability to become animals. But Stefan doesn't have most of these powers because he doesn't drink human blood. So Stefan then tells her that he thinks he hurt the old man under the bridge, Vicky and Mr. Tanner, but Elena suddenly realised that it wasn't him, it's been Damon this whole time. And she explains about the strange guy that she's met and the crow that has been following her. He tells her that he has thought about drinking her blood, and that's why he had to keep such a distance from her. And Elena's like, babes, you can drink my blood, like, you can do it right now. And he gets angry and tells her she could get hurt, and then she like kisses him and guides him to her throat, and he drinks from her, and then he lets her drink from him. So he didn't really put up that much resistance, if I'm honest. Elena leaves and promises they'll be together forever whatever happens, and Stefan heads to the woods to try and find Damon, which he does immediately. They argue, and Stefan tells Damon to stay away from Elena, but Damon says she's strong and might find that she likes the darkness more than he realises. Then Damon shows how strong he is by pulling out a tree by the roots, and he's like teleporting around Stefan while speaking inside Stefan's head, which apparently takes incredible power. He says he wants Elena, and although Stefan tries to fight, he has no real chance against Damon, to the point where Damon actually feeds on Stefan, which is low-key a bit weird because it's definitely been a sexual thing in every context so far. But mainly Stefan just feels pretty helpless, humiliated, and just really weak. Damon lets him go, and Stefan turns to leave, and when he's nearly back at the car, he hears movement behind him, and then Mackie's just joined us. And the next thing he knows, he's falling and blacks out. We then finish the book, Elena is late to school, and then she runs into Meredith, who tells her that Stefan has disappeared. The police went to the boarding house, but he wasn't there and he never turned up to school, and they think he skipped town because he was guilty of killing Mr. Tanner. Elena knows he would never leave of his own free will, so she runs towards the graveyard in anger, and there's this like big storm like going on, and there's winds whipping around her, and she shouts into the wind one word: Damon. And that is the end of book 1. So book 1 is not too far removed from the show. Not a whole lot happens. We obviously find out, Elena finds out Stefan's a vampire. They fall in love in the span of a few weeks. And yes, so we now have Stefan is missing and Elena is trying to confront Damon. So then we move on to the second book, which is called The Struggle. So the blurb is, Elena is torn between her boyfriend Stefan and his brother Damon, but these brothers hide dark secrets and a tragic past that threatens them all. Damon wants to lead Elena astray, and he'd rather kill Stefan than let him possess her. Who will she choose? So I preferred book 2 to book 1. It felt like there was a bit more action in this one. There is more vampires, obviously, because now we know they exist. And we get a lot more Damon than we did in book 1, although he is still pretty creepy and I still don't really like him or Stefan in these books. We also have a new character alert. We have the introduction of Alaric Saltzman. In the audiobook, he's called Alaric instead of Alaric, and it was a bit jarring, I can't lie. But other than that, he's kind of the same as the show, except he seems a lot younger in the book. He's like almost a student himself. He doesn't really have any of the backstory that he doesn't have a wife that died or anything like that. He's just like a pretty young teacher, basically. So we start book 2 exactly where last book ended, with Elena screaming Damon's name into the storm. He appears and he sort of feigns ignorance about Stefan being missing, and she slaps him. And she tells him if he's hurt Stefan, she'll find a way to hurt him. And he laughs and says he believes her, and he tells her that she's too good for his brother. He then offers to make her a vampire and says she'd have power and eternal life, and she can be his queen of the shadows and they can be together, which is a bit icky. For a second, she's like drawn in and she can't even remember Stefan, but then she snaps out of it. She tells him she's already found someone she wants to be with forever, and she tells him she hates him. So then Damon becomes pretty angry. He tells her winter is coming, and before it's here, she'll be his. And he tells her not to bother looking for Stefan because he killed him last night. So then Elena just kind of goes a bit mad. She decides she's just going to walk around in the storm trying to find Stefan, and she gets like really cold and I assume starts getting like pneumonia or something, because she just sits down and goes to sleep in the storm. And then she's woken up by Bonnie and Meredith shaking her, who get her in the car and ask her what's going on, but she won't tell them. So she gets back home. No one believes Stefan is innocent or in danger, and she sort of just loses it. She won't talk to any of them, and she just sits staring in the fire. Meredith and Bonnie insist they sleep over, but Elena's just frustrated because she knows they're just trying to keep an eye on her. But they sit her down and they tell her she's being an idiot, and they want to help her even if she can't tell them what's going on. And then they all cry and hug, and she sort of convinces them Stefan is innocent because she knows who did kill Mr. Tanner, and she knows who attacked the others, but she can't go to the police. She asks Bonnie to help her find Stefan, and Bonnie does a ritual and sort of like almost becomes Stefan and starts talking about being alone in the dark, how she's cold and surrounded by rocks, and that she's so thirsty it hurts. But then just before the ritual ends, Bonnie speaks in a different voice and says Elena shouldn't go to the bridge, her death awaits there. But when Bonnie comes back to herself, she can't remember saying that part. They think this means Stefan is under Wickery Bridge, so they head there, but they can't see or hear anything, and Bonnie says it doesn't feel right. Matt finds them when they're looking and scares the life out of them and says he followed them. They explain about Bonnie's vision, and Matt is pretty skeptical, but he says it sounds like a well. And then it's a little convenient, but they're like, there's loads of wells, but it's got to be one near a road, and it's got to be covered, and it's got to be just out of the way so no one would and then they just narrow it down to the exact well that they think it must be, which maybe it's just me, but I would have no idea where to look for wells in my local town, so it just seems a bit convenient. But anyway, they get there, lift off the cover, and Stefan is there. Matt is pretty shocked that Bonnie was right, and he asks if she can levitate Stefan out, which, to be fair, was quite funny. So they end up pulling Stefan out with some rope, and he's very weak and clearly very unwell, and they want to get him to a doctor, but Stefan says no doctors, and Elena convinces them to just take him back to the boarding house. They get him dry and wrapped up, but Elena notices he's been bitten but doesn't know how to give him blood without the others like thinking what the hell's going on. Elena manages to convince them to get Bonnie's sister Mary, who is a nurse, and although they're pretty suspicious, she convinces them all to go. She cuts her finger and gets him to drink some, and he comes round and he drinks from her neck, but still doesn't take nearly as much as he needs. But when she tries to argue, he says if he takes any more, then Elena will begin to change. And then the others return, and Mary, the nurse, says he doesn't seem dangerously ill, but suggests he get a checkup tomorrow morning, and they all leave. It's now the 3rd of November, and Elena has started a new diary and explains that although Stefan was questioned by the police, there's no case against him because he also has been attacked now. And at school, they have a new European history teacher, Alaric K. Saltzman. But instead of a lesson, he does like a weird therapy session about Mr. Tanner. And then he invites everyone over to his house that evening for like an informal get to know each other, which is weird. And then Alaric says this is his first teaching job, and Elena mutters, that explains it. And then Stefan replies, does it? Which is valid because that's a really weird thing to do as a teacher. Anyway, Elena ends up having an argument with Caroline because she notices no one is talking to her and everyone's kind of avoiding her. And Caroline tells her it's because her boyfriend is a murderer. And then Stefan overhears it and tells Elena they can pretend they've broken up if she'd like to. And that would make it easier on her, and she refuses and kisses him. Elena and Stefan arrive at Alaric's and everyone's there and it's very awkward. Bonnie clearly now has a crush on Alaric and is telling the others how nice he is. Elena's shocked to see that Damon is also at the party and she freaks out, but obviously has to act cool, and he has introduced himself as Damon Smith, a college student. He's definitely not as funny as the show Damon, but he does have a few one-liners, like when someone asks what he studies at college, he says American folklore and asks, did you know that a mole on your neck means you'll be wealthy? Do you mind if I check? Which I actually think was quite funny. Then Stefan and Damon have like this weird standoff, but Elena knows Stefan can't like do anything in front of everyone and is too weak anyway, so they leave. And as they're leaving, she finds someone has put a page from her old diary in her purse. Stefan explains some more of the vampire rules to Elena. So he says if a living human eats or sleeps somewhere, it is a dwelling and a vampire would have to be invited in, but they can be invited in by any human without even a verbal invitation as long as the intent is there. For example, when Elena invited Stefan into her house, she just nodded at him and that was enough. He also explains that running water is difficult to cross if you're stronger and have stronger powers. So he's been able to cross the bridge because he's so weak, but Damon likely could not. So stronger powers actually makes the limitations of a vampire stronger too, which is quite interesting. He explains about vervain as protection. It can keep your mind clear if someone is using mind control on you. He also says direct sunlight is very painful, and hints that the weather has been so cloudy recently because Damon is controlling the weather to make it easier for him to move around in the day. He tells her that killing a vampire requires a wooden stake through the heart or burning, beheading and driving nails through the temple, which is gruesome. And he says that turning into animals requires a lot of power, and even then it's limited to 1 or 2 animals at the most, so Damon is probably only able to be the crow. The next day, some of Elena's old diary is pinned on the bulletin board, and she tells Meredith and Bonnie about it, and they're as angry as she is. She also tells them that Damon is dangerous, and she's sure he's the killer, which shocked them both because Bonnie kissed him at Alaric's party. But they believe her and promise not to invite him into their houses. Then there's this weird scene in the cafeteria, and Vicky Bennett starts like doing a bit of a striptease in front of everyone, and no one kind of does anything. They're all just watching until Elena tries to get her to put her cardigan back on. But as soon as she touches Vicky, she looks terrified of Elena and says she's evil again and runs out of the room like half naked. Matt and Stefan head off on a road trip to get some vervain. They're like best friends. It's actually quite nice. But they didn't tell Elena, which seems kind of dumb because now she's just wondering where he is, and I don't really know why he wouldn't just tell her. So that night, Elena stays at Bonnie's. She believes Bonnie isn't safe and wants to try and protect her. That night, she has a dream where she's dancing with Damon, and she feels really powerful and dangerous, and she knows she should be with him. She drinks his blood and they carry on dancing, and she can't remember the last time she had such fun. And then he drinks her blood and she feels really happy. But then suddenly everything shatters and she's like screaming and trying to push him off. But instead of Damon, it's a crow. Bonnie's dad runs in and beats the crow with a broom and manages to get it out the window. And they all try and comfort Elena, although they keep asking why she took the locks off the window and left it open, even though she's insisting that she didn't. She suddenly looks in the mirror and can see 2 bite marks on her neck. Elena realizes that Damon was invited in by her weeks ago when they did that husband ritual. So now he can enter anytime he likes, and she panics and knows she has to leave, but convinces Bonnie she has to come too. They get back to her house and Bonnie falls asleep, but she hears Matt's car and sees Stefan and Matt pull up. Matt also falls asleep, and then Stefan explains that Damon could use his mind powers on her when she's awake or asleep, so she has to have Vervain with her at all times. And Elena thinks, you're a little bit too late for that, babes, but doesn't want to tell Stefan what happened. The next morning, Bonnie says she dreamt about Elena last night, but she was scared of her. She was very pale and fast, and she killed a crow and smiled at Bonnie, which was really scary. At school, there's another bit of Elena's diary printed in the school newspaper, and they suddenly realise that it must be Caroline. And Elena remembers about Caroline going to the photography room at lunchtime and goes to see if she's there, and ends up overhearing Caroline and Tyler talking about the diary and how they're planning to take down both Elena and Stefan during the Founders' Day celebration. The girls decide to go and search Caroline's house when they know no one will be home. They are looking around her bedroom, and after a lot of searching, they're almost ready to give up when Meredith finds a book under Caroline's mattress. However, it actually turns out to be Caroline's diary, and they read some of it, including stuff about all three of them. And then they hear a car pull up. Meredith and Bonnie run to go to the back door, but Elena's slower as she's got to put the diary back. By the time she goes to head downstairs, she can hear them already in the house. And she ends up sort of trapped in one of the bedrooms and goes out onto the balcony. Someone comes into the bedroom and she's panicking, so she tries to climb onto the roof, but it's about to get caught when someone grabs her wrist and pulls her up onto the roof, and it's Damon. Damon once again asks her to be his Queen of Shadows, which is just so cringy. He realizes she's on Vervain, and then he asks her what she's doing, and she tells him about the diary, and he says he'll help her for a price, and that price is some of her blood and some time alone with her. And she says she'd rather die and tries to fling herself off the roof, but he catches her and jumps off the roof holding her. The next day at school, there's like another weird incident with Vicky. She walks up to Dick and Tyler and starts to flirt with Tyler, and like when he tries to push her off, she like growls and snaps at his neck. She's a bit creepy. And then Alaric helps Elena and Dick pull her off, but she's somehow stronger than all three of them. Stefan explains that he thinks it's Damon that's still attacking Vicky, and there's not much they can do because her will was already so weak and now it belongs to him. Aunt Judith hosts a Sunday dinner, and Elena invites Bonnie and Matt. Meredith is visiting her family, but Elena realises she doesn't know much about Meredith's family. When she gets home, she sees Robert has invited a guest too, and it's Damon. Bonnie and Elena are both frozen in shock, but they don't know what to do except sit down and act normal. During the dinner, Bonnie has another psychic moment saying, "Death is in this house, your death, Elena," and then she collapses. And Aunt Judith and Robert insist she has to go home and go to bed, and Elena tells Damon to leave, although as he does, he says, "See you later," which she knows means he's going to come tonight now he's been invited in. She thinks about calling Stefan to protect her, but realises what can he do? And she suddenly has a realisation that some of the house was part of the original building that was mostly burned and then rebuilt to create the house now, including her own room upstairs. So that night, 2 a.m, she hears a noise and knows he's here. But when he reaches her room, he stops and is surprised and angry to see that he can't enter. Elena laughs and tells him he'll never be invited into her room as it's part of a different dwelling. And he snarls and turns around, but he actually puts his hand on Margaret's bedroom door instead, and Elena realises that he's giving her no choice, and she leaves her room and is enveloped in darkness. She wakes up the next day and feels bite marks on her neck, but is surprised to find she's alive and human. So it's now the 28th of November, it's nearly the Founders' Day, and Elena realises she only has one choice left. She has to tell Stefan. She goes to the boarding house and tells Stefan they need to talk. She tells him about her diary and that some of the stuff she'd written in there makes him look kind of guilty about the attacks. He tells her that she should be sorry because if she told him sooner, he could have helped her. He could tell something had been bothering her, but he thought she just didn't want to be with him anymore, and he's just very relieved and he wants to help. Then they drink each other's blood, and he tells her he loves her for the first time, and then he takes off Catherine's ring, which he wears on a chain around his neck, and asks Elena to marry him with it, which is wrong in so many levels. I mean, one, they've known each other barely any time. 2, using your ex-girlfriend's ring to propose to your new girlfriend who looks really similar to her is just a bit weird. But Elena says yes, although they have to keep it a secret until she's 18. They come up with a plan to get the diary. They say that they just need to find out where she's stashing it. And I'm like, I mean, she could easily have made copies of it because she's putting parts of it like around school and stuff, but it's not up to me to tell a vampire that his plan is bad. Caroline outsmarts them. There's like a parade, there's awards, there's a lunch. There's some young kids that do a pageant and they're dressed as little Confederate soldiers, which is a choice. And then it's Caroline's turn to speak, and she said she was going to read a poem but decided to read something much more relevant, something about Fells Church today, not 100 years ago. And then she goes to take out the diary but realises it's her own diary and not Elena's. And then she has this really awkward moment and runs off the stage. Elena and Stefan meet eyes across the room and they're both relieved but also pretty confused. And then she notices Damon is at the back of the room and he smiles at her. And so after she's done her speech, she goes to find Damon, asks him why he did it, and he just shrugs, although she sees in his face he's not really sure why he did it either. Aunt Judith finds them and says she's glad Damon could make it, and why doesn't he join them for dinner? She's sort of spent the last couple of weeks trying to hint at Elena that Damon is a better person to date than Stefan, which is just funny. But Elena loses it, shouts at Damon to leave her alone, and Aunt Judith tells her she thinks Stefan is a bad influence and doesn't want her to see him anymore, but Elena shouts back that she won't give him up for anything and ends up telling them that she's engaged. Damon sees the ring and storms off, and Robert and Aunt Judith sort of tell her she's ridiculous and she can't marry him, and Elena leaves in a huff and goes to the boarding house. She straight up steals Matt's car, which I think is a bit rich, but she drives off really angry, and then she starts to calm down and she realises she should be happy because they beat Caroline and Tyler. So she arrives at the boarding house but finds that it's locked and Mrs. Flowers isn't home, and she starts to notice the weather's a bit weird, like the wind's picked up, there's mist everywhere, and she says she can suddenly feel evil emanating from the graveyard in the distance, and she feels like she's in danger. She feels like something wants to kill her. So she panics, jumps back in the car, and she locks the doors, but the whole car is like rocking now, and she's like crying for help. And in the rearview window, she can see what looks like a great white bird. And she starts the car and manages to drive off, but sees the shape following her. A bolt of lightning hits nearby and a tree falls, which blocks off her route home. But she remembers about running water, so she heads towards Wickery Bridge. She can barely see where she's going, but all she can think is she has to cross running water now to save her life. She feels her car skid and finds herself going through the railing and into the river. Can't breathe, can't see, tries to scream, swallows a load of water, and everything goes still. We switch back to Stefan. Bonnie and Meredith are looking for him and find him surrounded by Tyler and his goon squad and Caroline, and a fight is about to break out when Bonnie suddenly says the bridge, and everyone turns to look at her and she freaks out, saying Elena needs their help and she's drowning. So Stefan, Meredith and Bonnie run to the car. The storm is so strong that they struggle to drive fast without losing control of the car. They reach the tree and have to get out and walk, and then when they get to the bridge they can see the railing is smashed through and they can see Matt's car in the water in a load of debris. Stefan immediately jumps in and we switch to Bonnie's POV as they wait for Stefan to surface, which he eventually does with a limp body. They try and do what they can, but Bonnie can tell Elena is not alive, and she can see by Stefan's face that he knows it too, and they're all shouting and crying, and then Stefan just sits there with Elena. Suddenly him and Bonnie feel something coming, something bad, and Stefan says that they have to go. We switch back to Stefan's POV. He kisses Elena's forehead, lays her under the willow trees, and in his rage and grief he goes back to Tyler and his friends and feeds on them all because he wants power. He turns into a falcon and flies out the window to find Damon, which he does in the woods, and immediately attacks him. Obviously he's a lot stronger now, so it's more of an even fight, although they're both getting injured. And Stefan tells Damon he should have killed him as well as Elena rather than leaving him alone. Then, in the final paragraph, we switch back to Elena's POV because she has woken up. She's freezing, cold, and confused, but she senses Damon and Stefan with her mind, and she can tell they're upset, and she knows where he is, and she knows he loves her and understands her, and she wants to be with him forever. He needs her help with his black eyes and secret smile, aka Damon. So she walks into the clearing. And that is the end of book 2. So we have finished the first 2 books. So we are now moving on to book 3 and 4. Book 3 is called The Fury, and the blurb is Elena struggles to control her desire for blood. Spoiler alert, she's a vampire now. Damon hungers for the golden girl and revenge against Stefan. Stefan is tormented after losing Elena. He will do anything to get her back, even if it means becoming what he once despised. Again, I thought this was better than the first 2 books because there's just so much more happening. I didn't actually find the characters as annoying and childish as they were sometimes in the first 2 books. It's kind of easy to figure out what's going on. I'm sure if you haven't guessed already, you will guess pretty early on. But to be fair, that is mainly because of the TV show. I imagine it would have been quite shocking without knowing in advance. But I do like how unhinged the villain is in this book. So, again, we open exactly where we left off. Elena's walking into the clearing. She describes the brothers. There's one green eyes, Stefan, and one black eyes, Damon. And she realizes she can see really clearly, even though it's really dark, and they are locked in a death match. Then she realizes she's here to help him, the one she belongs to. And she pulls Stefan off Damon, and he fights back and manages to pin her down, even though she's like hissing and fighting to hurt him. And then he sees her face and he goes still, and he sits back and says, Elena. And Elena thinks, is that what my name is? And she flings herself at Stefan again, and he tries to hold her back until she bares her teeth, and then he simply gives up. He freezes, goes white, and simply gives up and lets Elena bite his neck. Elena realizes immediately she hasn't done it right. Not much blood is coming, so she like sort of gnaws and like worries at his neck, trying to find an artery, and Stefan's just like jerking in pain, which is kind of a gross image. Damon pulls her off and tells her to stop, and she obeys immediately. And they all look at each other, and Damon asks Elena if she knows where she is and who they are. And she says, she's in the woods, that's Stefan, and you're Damon, and I love you. Stefan says that Damon's got what he wanted. It wasn't enough to kill Elena, he had to make her a vampire. But Damon denies killing her, and Elena's sat there wondering why they're talking about her death when she's so clearly alive. She can remember some of what happened, but nothing about Stefan, and doesn't remember going off the bridge. And she keeps asking Damon if they can go somewhere alone, just the 2 of them, although he keeps ignoring her. Stefan says she hasn't had enough blood to change, but Damon says it doesn't matter because she's in shock and irrational, and she'll need human blood if she's going to complete the change and not die. Damon says when she's herself again, they can ask her about who she chooses, but for now, he's going to find her blood and find who did this to her, and Stefan can help or not. They come out of the woods and they can see the bridge where there's a big crowd and the police, and she recognises Aunt Judith and Robert, and she can see Bonnie and Meredith crying. Elena strives to go forward to tell everyone she's okay, but Damon pulls her back and says he's going to draw over some paramedics so she can feed on them. But Stefan appears and says, no, she may need blood, but she doesn't need to hunt or attack anyone. He tells Damon to bring her to the school and he'll meet them there. We switch to Stefan's POV and he's miserable as always. He says it's torture seeing her like this. He thought seeing her death was painful, but this is much worse. So he uses his power to get Matt to come outside of the school for some fresh air, and when Stefan confirms that Elena went off the bridge, Matt breaks down. Stefan asks him if there was something he could do for Elena right now, would he do it? And Matt says anything. So Stefan leads him to the photography room where Damon and Elena are waiting. Elena comes out and Matt cries out, and it says, Elena stood there, but not the Elena of that afternoon when Matt had last seen her. Now her feet were bare beneath the hem of her long dress. The thin folds of the white muslin that clung to her were caked with ice crystals that sparkled in the light. Her skin, always fair, had a strange wintry lustre to it, and her pale gold hair seemed overlaid with a silvery sheen. But the real difference was in her face. Those deep blue eyes were heavy-lidded, almost sleepy-looking, and yet unnaturally awake, and a look of sensual anticipation and hunger curled about her lips. She was more beautiful than she had been in life, but it was a frightening beauty. Her pink tongue came out and licked her lips. So Matt is pretty terrified, especially when Damon also appears, and the 3 of them sort of surround him, but Stefan tries to get him to calm down and reminds him he said he'd do anything for Elena. And Matt is like, you know what, you're right, I did say that, what does she need? So then Elena bites his neck and drinks until Stefan and Damon have to pull her off, and then Damon takes her somewhere to rest, and Stefan waits with Matt while he recovers slightly. Stefan then remembers what he did to Tyler and his friends and panics, not knowing if he's killed 6 people. So he runs to the gym and Matt follows him, and they see what looks like a horror movie with bodies everywhere, blood everywhere. Stefan goes to Tyler and is relieved to see he's still alive, and he uses the power to wipe his memory and does the same with all of the other minds. But Matt is watching, and he looks disgusted at Stefan, realizes it was him that did this, and Stefan reminds Matt that he's a killer. He doesn't regret it one bit because he knows it's better for Matt to stay away from him. We then switch to Elena's PV. Damon told her to wait in the graveyard, but she's bored, so she decides to go home, but she climbs a tree to get in her window because she says she realizes she probably shouldn't go through the front door. She sees Aunt Judith and Robert are in her room talking about searching the woods for her, and basically Aunt Judith is like, we can't get married. I need to spend all my time and attention on Elena and Margaret so nothing happens to Margaret. And Robert is like upset and leaves, which seems harsh. But then Aunt Judith sees Elena in the window and screams. Then Damon pulls Elena out of the tree and asks her why she ran off. And he takes her to Alaric's house and leads her up to the attic, saying he stayed there before and she should be safe. When she wakes up the next day, she's more herself, although she's still a bit confused. And she can overhear Alaric and the school principal and a couple of other men talking about her. And Alaric says she must be in the woods and suggests that the vampires will have a lair out there. And he says if she comes back, he can take care of it. And the principal of the school says he hopes he made the right call calling Alaric to town. So clearly Alaric isn't as innocent as he makes out. Elena reads her diary to try and work out when and where she is and what's going on. And after finishing it, she remembers everything. She remembers dying. She remembers how she treated Stefan. And she remembers that she's a vampire. So then she has a little bit of a meltdown and eventually decides she needs to find Stefan, but realizes it's December 4th and she's actually slept for 4 days. There's no one around, so she heads towards the church in a bit of a daze and realizes everyone is also there, and then she realizes it's her funeral. And a girl called Sue Carson gives a speech about how Elena will always be the queen of the high school, and everyone says so much nice stuff, and Elena's sat there thinking half of this isn't true. Then Meredith gets up to talk and says, if Elena could hear me now, I'd tell her I miss those times. I miss meeting up on Thursday nights to practice for debate team in her room. And Elena's like, well, that's not right. We used to practice on Wednesday nights and we used to practice in your room. And she realizes that Meredith is sending a message to her, which means Meredith either knows or has guessed that Elena isn't dead. Then Bonnie starts talking and has another psychic moment and says, not in her voice, no one is what they appear. And then she collapses. So Elena's sort of, I think, watching from like the top of a church, like looking down on what's happening. And Stefan appears behind her and she like immediately falls into his arms and says sorry. And he's shocked, but eventually relaxes, and basically they just apologize to each other. And then Damon also appears, and apparently something is happening outside. So a bunch of people have come out the church and there's like a crowd of dogs there. Like all people's pets are just standing there unnaturally still as if waiting for something. Damon and Stefan realize they can't probe any of the dogs' minds, which is unusual. And they explain to Elena that animals have emotions and with power you can examine their minds, which is interesting. When suddenly all the dogs spring at once, like a big wave, and they push the man over and he like disappears beneath them, and the dogs are all snarling and barking and tearing at people, and loads of people are screaming and running. Stefan runs to help, but Elena realizes she can't let herself be seen because it would cause too much fear and panic. She asks Damon why he's not going to help, and Damon's like, why should I? And she gets really angry and they have a bit of a standoff. And then the fire department arrives and the sheriff starts firing his gun, and it ends quickly after that with most of the dogs scattering. Stefan finally returns and Elena has a sudden realization and she says, Damon, tell the truth. Did you put Stefan in the well? Because she knows it wasn't him that drove her off the bridge. And he looks confused and is like, no. And although Stefan doesn't believe them, Elena finds that she does. And she says there's something evil in Fell's church. Something that killed her, that attacked Stefan, and that controlled the dogs somehow. And she says whatever it is powerful. And so the three of them need to stick together to defeat it. Damon reminds her that she should make a choice between them. And although Elena knows she chooses Stefan, she also remembers how much excitement she felt with Damon and how gentle he was with her the past few days. And she feels very confused and overwhelmed and just puts her head in her hands. And she says, although she loves Stefan, they need to stay together for now. And Elena heads to Meredith's house. She knocks on Meredith's window, and initially Meredith looks terrified, but then once she hears Elena's be a bit sassy, she opens the window and invites her in. She admits she didn't know, but she'd guessed and noticed little things. And when they hear the doorbell, Meredith says Bonnie has come too. So Elena hides in the shadows, which I feel like is unnecessarily scary because Meredith's like, Bonnie, don't don't scream, and then Elena just like comes out of the shadows, which I just think is like, they didn't need to make it that creepy. Bonnie thinks she's just alive and is really happy until they tell her to calm down, and Elena asks if she's ever heard of vampires. And it's really quiet and awkward for a while. And Bonnie starts crying and gets a bit hysterical, and she shows them her teeth. And then eventually they all cry and hug and apologize. And she tells them about Stefan and Damon. She also tells them about her theory of another power in town that was controlling the dogs. And they make a list of suspects of anyone who's been behaving oddly. And it includes Robert, Alaric, and Mrs. Flowers, which seems like an odd list, but I think fair enough. There's a weird moment where Elena realizes she's really thirsty, and without realizing it, she starts like stroking Bonnie's vein on her wrist. And Bonnie and Meredith both look like sick with fear, and she says she's really sorry, but she can see they're pretty revolted. And Damon and Stefan suddenly appear at the window, and they say it's time for Elena to go hunting. So Bonnie and Stefan meet at school, and Bonnie's like, leave Alaric to me. She still has a crush on him, so she's like, I'll keep an eye on him. And he says that he's having another party at his house next week. They see Meredith, but she's acting pretty strange. And then the girls do a ritual to try and find out more about this other power. And the ritual basically says they can defeat it if they stick together, but not without sacrifice. Elena goes back to her house to check on Aunt Judith and Margaret. And she sees Aunt Judith asleep in front of the TV. And she finds Margaret asleep in bed with her little white kitten called Snowball with her. And then she starts to feel uneasy and realize Snowball is sat on Margaret's chest, and it's reminding her of the way the dogs were the other day. She can sense danger in the room, and Snowball starts to hiss as it looks at Margaret. Elena tries to wake her up, but she's too far from the window, so she jumps and somehow manages to like cling onto the sides of the house, and she bangs on the window, and Margaret wakes up, and as she sits up, pushes Snowball onto the floor. Elena tells her to open the window, which she sleepily does, and then tells her to invite her in, and as she falls into the room, the kitten jumps out. Margaret hugs Elena and says she's missed her, and Elena says she missed her too, and tells Margaret not to tell Aunt Judith about Elena. Margaret then asks if Elena is an angel, and Elena says not exactly. She then meets Stefan, and they go and sit on a nearby roof to talk, and they sort of cuddle and say they love each other. And Stefan agrees to work with Damon, but says he'll never trust him. Another week has passed, and it's time for Alaric's get together tonight, and then there's a thing called a snow dance tomorrow, which is like I guess like a Christmas dance, except they crown a snow queen. So they all go to Alaric's, and Stefan tells them Caroline asked to meet him beforehand so that he'll meet them there. Damon and Elena sort of hang around in Alaric's attic while Meredith and Bonnie attend the party, and they come up to check on them, and Meredith is like, be calm, and opens the door, and Alaric is there. Bonnie shouts because Alaric starts to pull a gun out, but in the blink of an eye, he's sat on the floor in a daze, and Damon is emptying the gun of cartridges. Meredith tells them all to stop it and explains he won't hurt them, and she spent all week trying to convince him that they won't hurt him. Elena trusts Meredith and tells Alaric that they won't hurt him. She asks what he is, and Damon says he's a vampire hunter. But when he starts to explain, he realises that Stefan isn't here. Elena says he was meeting Caroline and he should be here any minute, and Alaric suddenly looks panicked and tells them they need to stop him. Caroline remembers it was Stefan who attacked her and her father and some of the other men in town. No. Elena and Damon both try to search for Stefan with their minds, and they both sense distress. So they jump out the window, and Alaric is like shouting like, we're going to come too, and to let him do the talking before they do anything. But Elena and Damon are just running. Then Elena realises Damon would be faster as a bird, so she tells him to fly off, and he does. Damon arrives, sees Stefan on the floor with a head wound, and can sense he's very weak. He turns from a crow into a black wolf and jumps straight for the man holding the wooden stake over Stefan. He doesn't bite him, but he focuses on scattering all the men when he realises one of the men has a rifle and is about to shoot, when Elena suddenly arrives and knocks the gun out of his hand. Alaric then also drives into the clearing, shouting at everyone to stop, and asks what's going on. Elena's still hiding in the shadows, and the men say they were sick of waiting. And Caroline is by one of the cars whimpering and says they said they just wanted to talk to Stefan. Alaric says she's very confused and they might even have the wrong man, and he asks Caroline if it could possibly have been someone else who attacked them, and she says it could have been someone that just looked like Stefan. Alaric says he needs to get Stefan to a hospital, and they have no evidence he's not human, and Meredith says that there have been vampire attacks in town before Stefan even arrived, and her grandfather was a victim, which is an interesting twist. The men all leave kind of tails between their legs. And they all rush to Stefan, and he says he's okay, he just needs to rest, and they agreed to head back to the history room. Anyway, they all go back to the history room, and Alaric tells them he's a psychologist and not a history teacher. He's actually an experimental researcher at a university, and a few years ago he did a study trying to prove supernatural powers existed, but couldn't find anyone with genuine powers to test. He then got a tip about a woman who claimed to have been bitten by a vampire and had been having psychic nightmares ever since. Then he dropped everything else and started studying vampires, and he's written a lot of papers, but he's never actually seen a vampire until now. When Mr. Tanner was killed and there was no blood left in him, the principal had called Alaric as he's heard of him before, but he realised when he arrived that they expected him to deal with the vampires, which he's never done before, so he's kind of been faking it till he makes it. Meredith explains that she recognised Alaric from when her grandfather was in hospital after being attacked by a vampire. It happened before she was born, but he never recovered and spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. Alaric agrees to help them find the other power, and they all kind of decide they're going to work together. Elena then goes to visit Matt, and she says she doesn't want to shock him, but she wanted to see him. They have quite a sad conversation, and he cries and she cries. They talk about Stefan and how he's not eating and making himself sick and weak, and she also updates him on the other power and the dance tomorrow, and he says he'll come and help. He then lets her feed from him again. The whole gang is at the snow dance the next night, and it all seems to be going pretty fine. They're all doing patrols and like walking around defending it with the base in the history room, but nothing happens. It gets to midnight, it gets to 1 a.m, and they start to think maybe they were wrong, maybe nothing's going to happen. They ask Bonnie if she could do a ritual and see if she can figure out if something's happening elsewhere. And although she doesn't really want to, she agrees, and when she does go blank and silent, they ask where is the other power, and Bonnie, as not Bonnie, says come and see, and stands up and walks out of the room, and they all follow her. She gets into Alaric's car and she takes them to the ruined church and to the tomb. Damon and Stefan lift the lid off the tomb, and they're all surprised to see that it's actually a doorway with a ladder going down into the darkness. Bonnie suddenly walks in and starts to descend, and Stefan quickly jumps in, shouts that it's fine and that the ladder goes all the way down. Elena follows him, and they wait as everyone else descends, and then Damon comes last, but he looks a bit like unreadable is how it's described. So they're actually in a crypt, and they followed Bonnie deeper inside, and Elena can smell that they're all very scared. There's another tomb down there with a big white statue, but this one has been destroyed and the lid is cracked and there's bones everywhere. And then Bonnie suddenly is herself again, and a voice says hello to Elena, and it's Honoria Fell. She's appearing as kind of like a ghost or some sort of like glow, and she explains that she's been waiting for them, and now that they're here she doesn't need to speak through Bonnie. She says when she was alive she was psychic, and this was a secret resting place made for her and people like her and Bonnie. She woke because of another entity arriving in town and ransacking her grave, and it has been spreading evil and hatred, and she has been trying to warn Elena. She says it has been living in the graveyard, sometimes taking the form of an owl, and Elena thinks about the big white bird that drove her off the bridge. Honoria tells them that it hated Stefan before it hated Elena, and has been playing with him like a cat playing with a mouse, and its hatred is so great that any bloodshed is fine. It has been controlling the animals that they're currently on their way to the snow dance to kill. She says the animals won't stop until the other power is defeated, and she also offers Bonnie a chance to get rid of her powers, but Bonnie ends up saying she'll keep them and learn to deal with them. Honoria says she's given them all the help she can and leaves them, and they all start to panic. Some say they should leave and help at the dance. Elena and Stefan say they need to stay and fight, and Elena realises Damon has disappeared, and she notices a wide, like, gaping tunnel in the wall behind them. Suddenly there's a loud noise from the tunnel, and Bonnie screams, and a white tiger launches itself at them, and Elena screams Damon's name just as a black wolf springs out of the darkness to meet it. It's not really any match. The tiger almost immediately overpowers the wolf, but then Stefan joins in, and it gives the others time to get out the gate, and Stefan shouts at them to go to the dance to protect and warn the town. Elena's being a bit annoying, and she's like calling to Stefan, and the tiger has knocked the wolf, aka Damon, to the ground, but he's not dead, he's just in a pool of blood, and it turns to look at Stefan and Elena, and they are suddenly surrounded by fog, and they both fall unconscious. Elena comes to and thinks about white owls and white kittens. She thinks about how this power has hated Stefan, and she suddenly knows, and as she opens her eyes she sees a pale girl in a white dress, which with what could be her own face, but distorted, twisted and mocking. And she says, "Hello, Catherine." She sees Stefan is next to her with a torn throat and covered in blood, and she asks why Catherine did that, and Catherine says it's because she loves him. And then she notices Damon is on her other side, and he looks even worse than Stefan, and they're all tied up. Catherine is sort of mocking her and laughing and twirling around like she's genuinely unhinged, and she asks which one Elena thinks is best. And then Elena notices that what she thought was a train on her long dress is actually long golden hair that trails all the way to the floor. Catherine then feeds on Damon. We switch to the dance. Alaric, Meredith, Bonnie and Matt have arrived, and Meredith finds Aunt Judith and Margaret and hides them in the cellar. The other three tried to get everyone back inside, and the first dogs arrive and gunshots start ringing out, and Bonnie and Matt start a fire in the doorway as the animals won't come near it. So they help direct people back inside and sort of start to guard the door. We then go back to Elena, and then she sees Stefan see Catherine and see he's shocked, then he's in disbelief, then there's joy on his face, and then there's dawning horror. And then Catherine wakes Damon up too, and he just stares at her and smiles and says he should have known. Catherine sort of gleefully tells them what she's been doing and how much fun she's been having. She says she put Stefan in the well and was going to keep him there to play with, but Elena took him back, and that annoyed her. She attacked Vicky and has been messing with her ever since. She killed Bonnie's dog, and obviously she killed Elena. And she was annoyed when Elena came back, and she says she lost her temper because Stefan gave Elena her ring that day. She says she fooled them 500 years ago. She wanted them all to be happy because she loved them both, but they wouldn't accept her choice. She pretended to die by having a new talisman made and giving her maid her dress and ring and some ashes from the fireplace along with a note. Stefan says that they were stupid and he regrets it and would do anything to take it back. He says he killed his brother, and as he does, his voice cracks, and Elena sees Damon watching him intently. Stefan tells Catherine they've all been wrong, but she can keep him and let the others go. And Catherine says it's too late. She says after she saw them kill each other, she ran to her old home, and Klaus found her and told her about how the world really is. She found out you have to be strong and selfish, and you get strong by taking life, which she's been doing all these years. She used her power to get both Damon and Stefan to Fel's church. She thought they'd see Elena and feel guilty, but they weren't supposed to fall in love with her. And Catherine says she hates Stefan the most because she loved him the best, and she's going to make him pay. But she doesn't hate Damon as much, and she offers him to keep her company. She knows he gets how the world really is, and she'll let him kill the girl, and then they can go away together. Damon smiles. Catherine smiles back and says she's sorry for hurting him, and they'll be so happy together. And Damon gets her to come closer and then tells her to go to hell. Her face twists and a surge of rage and power flies from her, and she falls on Damon, biting and scratching him and screaming with her mind that she's going to kill them all. We switch quickly back to the dance. Meredith, Aunt Judith and Margaret in the basement, but they can hear the dogs outside the door scratching and working at it. And Bonnie feels like Bonnie and Matt have been setting fires at all the openings, and they've managed to keep most of the dogs out, but the guns are empty now and they're running out of stuff to burn. Catherine says she's going to kill them now, and then she's going to use the tunnel to go and kill their friends. While she's debating the best way to kill them, Elena realizes that she can feel the ropes have slackened, so she starts working to get free. And then just as Catherine walks towards the beam of sunlight coming from the crypt's opening, Elena jumps up and rushes her, pushing her into the light and hearing her head crack against the rocks. She also feels the most unbearable pain herself, because remember, Elena doesn't have a talisman ring, but she manages to reach up and yank Catherine's necklace from her neck. Catherine's now shrieking, her face, body and hair are blackened and on fire, and Elena's too weak to lift herself off, but then she feels something grab her and pull her into the shadows, and she sees Stefan's arms are red and bleeding where he's torn himself free and reached into the sunlight to get her, and then she passes out. Back at the dance, the dogs all suddenly stop trying to attack. And then we go back to Elena, and Elena slowly opens her eyes. She realises nothing hurts anymore, and she feels like she's floating. She can see Catherine's remains on the floor, and then she turns to Stefan, and they say they love each other. She asks if the people at the dance are okay, and he says she saved them, and she asks him to say goodbye to her friends and family and to tell them that she loves them. Damon crawls towards them and tells Elena to hold on, but she smiles at him and realises she loves him too and promises to try, even though she knows this is the end. She tells Stefan she wants to rest, and he tells her that it's okay, and he promises not to let her go. She notices Damon is crying, and she touches both their faces gently. She says that she makes them promise to take care of each other, and then she dies. We then switch to Stefan's POV briefly, and he starts to walk towards the light, but Damon pulls him back, grabs his ring and puts it on his finger. They look at each other as Damon sits back painfully, and Stefan remembers his promise and helps Damon up and says they need to find him somewhere to rest. We then switch to Bonnie's diary entry. She says everyone started to forget what happened. They all think it was just a rabies outbreak that caused the dogs to go crazy. She says Sue Carson and Vicky are better, Caroline is better, Alaric and Meredith are okay, and Bonnie thinks there's something going on between them. She says Matt is okay. She says lots of people think Stefan killed Elena, but some others think it was Damon. They've both disappeared, and she thinks Stefan has followed Damon to look after him. And then it ends. I want people to know the truth about Elena. She wasn't a saint. She wasn't always sweet and good and honest and agreeable, but she was strong and loving and loyal to her friends. And in the end, she did the most unselfish thing anybody could do. Meredith says it means she chose light over darkness, and I want people to know that so they'll always remember. I always will. And that is the end of book 3. So Elena's dead. For reals this time. And that means book 4 is actually told from Bonnie's point of view, which is very interesting. So we are on to the last book. If you're still with me, you are doing great. And I promise, I actually think this is the best book so far. So the blurb is, Elena is threatened by a terrifying evil. Damon, summoned by Elena to face a common enemy, puts his trust in the brother he loathes. Stefan attempts to keep his promise to Elena and protect the town from its most powerful villain yet. Who will survive? So this is the last book in the original quartet. Like I said, I think it's the best so far. It's the best Damon book so far, for sure. Stefan is actually better in this book because he's actually a bit more ruthless and less whiny. And the villain in this book is really well written and very creepy. And I really like the ending. And honestly, Bonnie, I didn't really love in the first few books. She's quite shallow and silly, but it's really nice reading from her POV in this one because we see her personality a bit deeper. So like I said, we are now from Bonnie's point of view because Elena is dead. We open the book at it's been 6 months since Elena died, and Caroline is trying to convince Bonnie to throw a surprise party for Meredith's birthday. And Bonnie feels like it's a bad idea. She says they don't really feel ready for parties, but Caroline tells her that Elena would want them to be happy. She wants things to be like they used to be. She wants them all to be friends again, and she also wants to invite Sue Carson. But Bonnie's like, you can't just replace Elena with Sue and think everything will be the same. Bonnie says they should also invite Vicky Bennett, and although Caroline doesn't want to, she agrees. That night, Bonnie has a really creepy dream about Elena where they're having this like beautiful picnic, but they're talking about blood and saying all these really unsettling things. And then her sandwich suddenly has like mud in it, and Elena says, like, has a creepy man's voice and her teeth are all brown. And then Bonnie looks around and realizes they're in a graveyard and there's things coming out of the graves and the sandwiches have like bugs in. And Elena's now just like a skeletal grey thing. Saying that she can't leave yet and they've been waiting for her. But then suddenly she hears Elena's real voice and it's saying, it's really urgent, and it's saying, Bonnie, you need to listen. Bonnie, listen. He's twisting things, changing them. I'm not as strong as he is, but this is important. You have to find right now. But her voice is sort of fading and she can't catch all the words. And then she hears, an easy spell, only 2 ingredients, the one I told you already. And then Bonnie wakes up. Bonnie tells Meredith about the dream the next day, but Meredith brushes off as just a weird nightmare. They arrive at Caroline's house for the party, and the girls are all talking. Caroline says she wants a photo of them all and gets Vicky to take it, which bothers Bonnie because it's quite mean. And then we learn a bit of backstory about Meredith. So she celebrated her birthday a week early. The 6th of June, which is today, is actually her real birthday, but her parents started celebrating it early because it's the date her grandfather was attacked by a vampire and went crazy, and he tried to kill her grandmother and Meredith herself. So she tells Bonnie that today is actually her real birthday. The party's a little bit awkward, but the girls start to relax and they're all sort of talking and having fun. Caroline asks Meredith what's going on with Alaric, and Meredith tells her he's away in Russia, and because he's 4 years older, Meredith told him that they need to wait until she's graduated, but she's 18 today and graduation is in 2 weeks. They then start talking about how much they miss Elena. Bonnie tells them about her dream and says she feels like Elena was trying to tell her something. Caroline says that her parents have an Ouija board, and the girls all get quite excited and wonder if they can contact Elena. They gather around the coffee table with the lights dimmed, and they all put their fingers on the planchette, and Bonnie tells them all to close their eyes and picture Elena, and she says, Elena talks to me. The planchette starts to move, and they realise it's stopped on the word yes. Bonnie asks if it's Elena talking, and it does a little circle and returns to yes. And then Elena gives them some messages. Caroline says, "How can we be sure?" And then the planchette is moving, touching all the letters so quickly that Meredith is trying to spell out the message. And it says, "Caroline, don't be a jerk. You're lucky I'm talking to you at all." And they're like, "Oh yeah, this is definitely Elena." And then Bonnie starts crying, and Elena says, "Bonnie, there's no time. Stop snivelling and get down to business." She basically says, "Corrupting influences distorting our communication. There are bad things, very bad things out here. He's busy, so I can talk now, but there's not much time. Listen, when we stop, get out of the house fast. You're in danger." And she then says, "Wait, listen first. The whole town is in danger. You need help. He's out of your league, unbelievably strong. Now listen and follow instructions. You have to do a summoning spell, and the first ingredient is..." And then the planchette starts jerking around and going wild. Bonnie can suddenly feel a different presence along with Elena, and she tells them all to stay touching the planchette. But the last thing they can read is the words "run, run, run," and then the planchette flies across the room and all the lights go off. Vicky's screaming, and Meredith tells her to stop and that they all need to hold hands, and Caroline will lead them out the house. They do, and Bonnie gets Meredith and Caroline's hands and notes that Caroline doesn't sound scared, just a bit annoyed. She says her eyes should really be adjusting slightly, but it's so dark that she can't see a thing, and she can hear Vicky and Sue comforting each other as they walk. They get to the hallway and Caroline lets go to get the door, but Bonnie panics and tells her not to, and as she tries to grab her hand back, something large and moist closes around her fingers. It's a hand, but not Caroline's. Bonnie screams, and then Vicky immediately starts screaming again, and the hand that Bonnie has grabbed starts to pull her along until she feels Meredith grab her with both arms and pull her free, and they both run wildly. Bonnie is still screaming until they hit an armchair, and Meredith says she needs to be quiet because whatever grabbed her is still around. They can't hear a thing, and eventually Meredith whispers they need to go out the back door, but Bonnie realises Vicky isn't screaming anymore and insists they have to get her because she's only here because Bonnie invited her. They hear a door slam and feet crashing upstairs, and then they hear Sue shouting. They slowly start to edge into the dark, and Bonnie's terrified that something's going to grab her again, and she's crying as she goes, but then from upstairs comes the most horrifying sound she's ever heard. There's screaming, there's Sue screaming, "No, Vicky, no," then a crash and the sound of glass shattering, and then one long scream of pure terror, and then it goes silence. They manage to find the staircase and make their way up, and Meredith says something very bad has happened and they need to see what it is. When they reach the landing, the lights come back on, but it's almost worse because they can now see the fear in each other's faces. Meredith opens the door and tries to tell Bonnie not to look, but Bonnie ignores her. It looks as if the whole side of the house has exploded outwards, with the wood splintered and glass shattered. Curtains are billowing in and out of the gaping hole in the side of the house, and Vicky is standing motionless. But Vicky doesn't turn or answer her, and when Bonnie gets closer, she can see she's staring and whispering, "I'm next." It said "I'm next" over and over again. Meredith and Bonnie move to the balcony, and on the ground, there's a twisted, broken doll, which is Sue Carson. The next day, Meredith and Bonnie meet up. They see a bunch of kids in the school parking lot, and they decide to go and try and talk to them and explain what happened, but they all think that Vicky must have pushed Sue off the balcony. Tyler quickly jumps in saying he thinks Vicky did it, or else Stefan is back in town. Meredith and Bonnie are left with Matt. They can see Matt is really sad and lost and bitter, and they find it hard to talk to him, but he agrees to help when they ask him, and they tell him what Elena said about the summoning spell with the 2 ingredients. They brainstorm and figure out that the ingredients are hair and blood. The reason for this is that when Bonnie had the dream, Elena said hair is very important, and she said blood is important too, which again, a little bit convenient. They realise that Elena would want to summon Stefan, and so they need Stefan's hair and blood to do the spell. But then they realise there's one place Stefan's hair and blood might be: the crypt. So they go there. They've managed to scrape some of Stefan's blood off the floor with a knife, which is kind of gross. And they sweep the room for bits of gunk and dust and stuff, and manage to sift out some hairs that they think are Stefan's. And as they are heading back to Bonnie's, Meredith mentions Tyler, and Bonnie suddenly has a realization that the hand that grabbed her that night at Caroline's reminded her of his hand. It was big and meaty and hot. But Meredith and Matt brush her theory off, saying that Tyler isn't psychic and they wouldn't need Stefan to defeat him. They find a spell in one of her druid books, and it takes some preparing, so they gather all the stuff they need, and at midnight they do the spell. We then switch to Stefan's POV, and he's in Florence, Italy, and he tells Damon off for being careless, and Damon just laughs, and they argue a little until Damon says, "You followed me here. If you're not enjoying it, just leave." And Stefan says, "You know I can't." because Stefan is determined to keep his promise to Elena that he will look after Damon. He then suddenly feels a presence in his head, and it's Bonnie. And she tells him Elena told her to do this and they need help. But then the communication fails and Stefan is left in shock. A couple of nights later, she has another dream about Elena. They're having ice cream sodas, and Elena tells her that he is watching them and tells Bonnie that they can't let him in. And as the dream starts to go like creepy and weird, she tells Bonnie to tell Stefan she loves him. The next day at school, Stefan arrives to find Bonnie, and she tells him it was crazy for him to come to school and that he needs to hide. She goes and gets Matt and Meredith, and they get him out of the school. Outside is Damon's Ferrari, and he rolls down the window and says hello, which makes Bonnie say, oh my God. And they all agree to meet at the boarding house. And then Bonnie thinks about when Damon kissed her at Alaric's party, but I haven't really mentioned it much. Bonnie thinks about every single male character in this book. She also has a thing for Matt at the moment. She's just very boy crazy. They tell Stefan he shouldn't have bought Damon and he can't be trusted. And then Damon appears and Bonnie grabs Matt's hand, and then Damon asks, oh, is she yours now? And Matt says no. And it's just weird. I feel like they're trying to put another love triangle in with Bonnie, Damon and Matt, but it's a bit forced, I feel like. And then Damon explains that Stefan didn't bring him, they did, because the spell they used included his hair too. And then Bonnie tells them everything that's happened. Stefan asks Bonnie if she can speak to Elena in a trance because he's so desperate to speak to her, but she says it's too dangerous because she'd be opening herself up to whoever Elena is warning them about. And Stefan explains why Fell's Church seems to attract evil. He says some places have a lot of psychic energy which can be positive or negative. Some places are always that way, but some become that way when a lot of blood is shed. And during the Civil War, Fell's Church was the site of a horrible battle where nearly everyone was killed. And then they go to Vicky's. They stand outside Vicky's window, and Stefan taps on the window and she appears at the window. She invites Stefan in, and Matt and Meredith follow, but Damon and Bonnie stay outside. And Vicky says they shouldn't be here, he's coming back for her and he'll get them too. He killed Sue and he comes to her in her dreams. Meredith tries to comfort her by saying they won't let him hurt her, but Vicky just laughs. And this awful laugh goes on and on until Stefan tells her to stop, and she just says they're all going to die. She says he looks like the devil. He wears an old raincoat that flaps around his legs. He has blonde, almost white hair. He has electric blue eyes, and blue is the colour of death. Loads of stuff starts like rattling, like the pictures on the wall start rattling, and everything's getting louder and things are flying around her room and off the shelves. Everything that can move is shaking and swaying, and Vicky is just screaming, and a flash of lightning flares, and as it does, a poster on Vicky's wall slashes in half as if like an invisible knife has cut it, and then everything stops. They all look around, and Bonnie realises she's grabbed onto Damon's arm and he hasn't moved away from her. He's looking intently at the mirror and tells everyone to do the same, and in Vicky's lipstick are scrawled the words, "Good night, sweetheart." Stefan gives Vicky some Bavane and tells her to try and give some to her parents. Stefan says he needs to go, but he doesn't want to leave Vicky or the girls alone, and Damon offers to stay, which everyone seems unsure about, but they reluctantly agree. In the car, Stefan says he has a theory that the killer is a vampire, and the only way he can know is by looking at Sue's body. Meredith says there's a viewing at the funeral home later, and Stefan says they'll have to wait until after everyone has left. So they go there. Stefan lifts open the coffin, and there's nothing on her neck, but there's a cut over her heart. Stefan says this is odd. If he saw a cut like this on a vampire, it would mean they'd been feeding their blood to a human, but it's not normal to see on a human. And then Bonnie cries, Matt comforts her, and then has a speech about how awful the world is and how there's no point to anything, which is a bit much. The next night, they're all sat in a car watching Vicky's house, and Stefan says they need to find some records of the history of Fell's Church. He has an idea about what might have happened, but he's not sure enough to share yet. And Meredith asks to stay watch with Bonnie while Matt and Stefan go to the library. They find the journal, read the story of Honoria Fell and her husband, and in the story, Stefan finds out his idea was right and that Sue had died for a blood ritual. Matt then does another very dramatic speech about the world being evil and everything being pointless, and then Stefan makes him feel better. And it's actually kind of nice, to be honest. I quite like their friendship. We switch back to Bonnie and Meredith, and Meredith falls asleep, and Bonnie knows she can't fall asleep, but she's really tired, so she gets out of the car for some fresh air. She locks the door behind her and goes to tap on Vicky's window, but can see she's also asleep, and then she realises she's not alone. She turns around, but can only see darkness, and she's so scared she can't even scream, and then she whirls around again and is caught by Damon, who says she looks frightened. He tells her she doesn't need to be frightened of him, traces her lip and asks if she wants him to go away, but she just trembles and feels like she might melt. And then Damon kisses her, but Matt interrupts them and tells Damon to get the hell away from her. We then go into Matt's POV, and Matt is like, you should pick somebody your own size, and Damon is like, what, like you? And Matt dares him to try and calls him a murderer, murderer. And Damon says he killed Mr. Tanner, but only after Mr. Tanner stabbed him, which is a bit random. Damon starts to advance on him, but Matt refuses to run even though he's scared. And Damon says he's being stupid, grabs Matt by the neck and shows him his teeth, and then shoves him away and tells him to go as it's his watch. And he thinks he can see a grim respect in Damon's eyes as he leaves. We then go to Bonnie's POV again, and she says Stefan has a plan to trap the killer. Meredith has the most dangerous job, which Bonnie is a little annoyed about because she thinks they all think she's not as smart or strong as Meredith. But the plan is for after graduation, and they're all in on it except Damon, who will be watching Vicky at the time. We skipped graduation. Everyone's throwing their caps in the air and are taking photos. She walks over to Meredith and it's time for their plan. So they start talking quite loudly. Meredith says it's not fair, Elena isn't here, and Bonnie suggests they go to the party Tyler and his friends are throwing. Meredith is annoyed and says how can she suggest that, and she says she's going to go to the ceremony later and put her graduation tassel on Elena's grave. Bonnie says she's been crazy and she can't go on her own, but Meredith says she doesn't care, she's going by herself. They argue, Bonnie slaps Meredith and everyone's staring, and then Meredith says she doesn't want to speak to her ever again and walks off. We then switch to Meredith's POV, and she's at the cemetery. She says she wishes Alaric was there with her, and she goes to Elena's gravestone and puts down the tassel and some flowers and then kneels and waits. And then she hears footsteps and someone says, "Hello, Meredith." And she's shocked to see that it's Tyler and asks him why he's here. And he just does this unsettling grin and says it's just him and no one else, which is a weird thing to say. And then he says some other weird stuff and asks Meredith to come and see his family's plot, but she's like, no thanks. She says she's leaving and he says no she's not, and he starts telling her about his family headstone, and he says he knows a lot of things, including what she's got in her pocket, aka the vervain. He's got a friend who's into these things. He tells her he knows it's for vampires and he laughs, and as she starts to back away he says she's not going anywhere and vervain isn't going to help her. She tries to stay calm, but she can feel herself shaking. Tyler grabs her wrist and she can feel it's hot and damp and large, just like Bonnie said. She tells him to let go, that he's hurting her, and he says this is a secret that no one else knows. She came out here decked against vampires, but he's not a vampire. He says the Smallwoods aren't vampires at all, and then he growls, and it's not a growl that any human could have made. And Meredith starts screaming because his red tongue is lolling among rows of long canine teeth. And he sort of just seems like he's going to eat her as well as assault her, which is kind of awful. It says, his face wasn't a face anymore. It jutted out grotesquely into a muzzle, and his eyes were yellow with slit-like pupils. His reddish sandy hair had grown over his cheeks and down the back of his neck. His breath was hot and it smelled feral like an animal, and the nails he was digging into her wrist were stumpy blackened claws. Although he still stood on 2 feet, his body was humped and strangely distorted, which is just kind of gross. Like, he didn't turn into a wolf. He's just like some weird, like hulky man. It made me think of the one in Harry Potter. So she starts to pass out, and then she hears Matt shout to Tyler to take his hands off her, and he punches Tyler in the face, and they start fighting, and then Stefan joins in. Him and Matt kind of beat him up and tie him up and take him to the church to ask him some questions. Stefan shows him this book that he got out of the library and says it talks about werewolves, and basically says the cut on Sue Carson, his theory is that a vampire wanted to draw blood for somebody else to drink. If a vampire wanted to give someone else the first and only taste, he might do that. Blood is good for initiation and power. And basically, this vampire, who is the evil power, taught Tyler how to reclaim his heritage and become a real werewolf. He had to kill and taste fresh blood, which is why they killed Sue Carson. They start to threaten him because he won't tell them anything about his friend who's a vampire. And Stefan says he read that werewolves can be cured by cutting off one of their members. So they get an axe and hold him down and talk about cutting his foot off. And he's like screaming and like saying, no, please don't. I'll talk. He basically says the killer is a vampire and looks like how they said. He's got blonde hair, he wears a raincoat. And he says he's one of the old ones, the originals. A stake in his heart won't even kill him, but there is one kind of wood that can hurt him. Not kill him, but hurt him. But he didn't tell Tyler what it was, and then Tyler said he was going to Vicky's tonight, and they all stop and look at each other. They leave Tyler tied up and go, and Bonnie's already crying because there's police cars everywhere. Stefan and Matt go out to see what's going on, and they see Vicky's window is broken, and all they can see inside is red. The floors are red, the walls are red, the bed is red, it smells really like coppery, and the record player is playing and Bonnie realizes the song is Good Night, Sweetheart. And they all kind of lose it. All the police are saying it was a suicide, that she's mentally imbalanced and she got hold of some scissors, and that she was guilty of killing Sue. Stefan is shouting at Damon. He says some pretty nasty stuff to Damon, and they start fighting, and eventually Damon's just like, you know what, I'm leaving for good, and if you follow me, I'm going to kill you. And Stefan's like, don't worry, I won't follow you. And then Damon leaves, and they go back to the cemetery to get Tyler, but when they get there, Tyler is gone. Bonnie can tell Stefan's taking all of the blame. They all feel very defeated, and then she realizes now Damon is gone that Stefan is their best protection. But he's very weak and exhausted. She ends up offering Stefan her blood, and he says no, and she realizes she can give him Elena. And he thanks her very fiercely. She goes into a trance and tries to reach her, and then she'll try and draw Stefan in. And so she does this. She opens her eyes in a funeral home. Elena says, I told you not to come here, but Bonnie tells her it's to see Stefan, and Elena seems shocked and starts crying. And she says when he comes and things change, she doesn't want Stefan to see her like that. And she's basically saying, please don't bring Stefan here. I don't want him to see me like this. And Bonnie says, all right. And she tries to reach Stefan to explain, but the second her mind touches Stefan's, he takes over and he appears next to them. And so they sort of have this moment. They're both shocked and staring at each other, overcome with emotion. And they kiss, and we get 3 pages of how incredible Stefan feels and how happy he is and how perfect Elena is. And Elena's shaking with fear, but she says, it's not because anything can hurt me. I'm scared for what he might do to you. And she tells Stefan he needs to go, but he refuses. And when he turns around, he sees the devil. Someone that looks like the devil. He's wearing a tattered, dirty raincoat. He's got electric blue eyes and almost white hair and a wide smile. And he says, I presume you're Stefan. And this man says he's one of the originals. He was a vampire during the building of the Colosseum and fought in the Trojan War. And then the man continues talking and reveals he's the vampire who changed Catherine. So this is Klaus, or that's what Catherine called him anyway. He's kind of angry because Elena killed Catherine. And he's annoyed that Catherine never got over Stefan. And yeah, he's annoyed that Elena killed her. So although he can't get to Elena because she's already dead, he's been playing with her friends. He says he can make nightmares come true and suggests letting Stefan see what Elena really looks like now as a 6-month dead body. And Stefan's like, I'm not scared of death, it's fine, and looks at Elena, and Elena starts to decompose and become a pile of bones. Klaus is just singing and laughing. He's again very unhinged. Stefan manages to recreate Elena in front of them, and she smiles, and basically they're standing in front of Klaus bitch, we love each other, you can't do anything. So then Klaus goes berserk and Elena gets pulled away, and Stefan is also taken by the darkness. And then Bonnie and Stefan both get thrown out of the trance. And then Elena had said one last thing while she was pulled away, that the only way to stop Klaus is to find a victim and ask him. And Stefan explains that when vampires share blood, the donor shares minds briefly with the vampire, and his victim may have learnt something that way. Then a week passes and Stefan decides he has to go to Europe and search for a vampire that Klaus has made. Bonnie realizes that Klaus has been in America for a while, and he attacked them on Meredith's birthday. So she rings Meredith and they agree to try and see her grandfather. So with Matt and Stefan, they head to the institution where Meredith's grandfather is, and they meet Meredith's granddad, but he doesn't seem to react when they talk to him. He just sort of stares, and they all feel defeated and start to leave. He's looking at something behind them that they can't see, but he's howling the word vampire. And everyone attendants come in and restrain him and ask them to leave, but they hear him say white ash wood before the door slams shut. So now they know that white ash wood can kill Klaus, but they don't know where he's hiding. And Bonnie realizes that tonight is the eve of the solstice, which is a day for magic and a day when the line between the visible world and the invisible world is thin, when you can see ghosts and when things happen. At the boarding house, Mrs. Flowers is there, and they ask her where they can find a white ash tree, and she's like, oh, there's one right over there. So they all go and cut it down, which again, very convenient. Stefan starts to turn it into a stake, and then Mrs. Flowers is like, oh, by the way, Stefan, we have there's a package arrived for you, which is weird because no one knows Stefan is there. Anyway, in the package is a green scarf, and they know Klaus has Caroline. And Stefan's like, you are all stupid humans. I need to go and do this on my own. I don't need you to help me. If you follow me, I'll kill you. And then he leaves. And they're all just like, why is Stefan being like this? Obviously, we're going to follow him. Anyway, they do. They gather up all these weapons and they head to the old farmhouse, which is where Klaus said he would be. They sort of scoot to this on their stomachs to this place where they can look down, where Klaus might not see them. And they can see Caroline next to the abandoned house. She's wearing a gag. And they see Klaus appear and Caroline sort of shrinking away from him as he laughs. And then Stefan stands on the edge of the clearing. So then Stefan says to let Caroline go, but Klaus says he wants to talk first. And then Bonnie notices that the tree above Stefan is rustling slightly. And before she can think, she stands and shouts that Stefan, something's above you. It's a trap. Stefan leaps aside and Tyler drops down where he'd been standing. And Klaus whirls at Bonnie and somehow throws lightning at her. But Matt pulls her out the way and she feels like the bolt of lightning snap over her head. Stefan is beating Tyler. Meredith runs towards Caroline from behind the house and manages to cut her ties and drag her away while Klaus is watching Stefan and Tyler fight. Klaus attacks Stefan and they're both sort of holding sticks, like sharp sticks, obviously to try and stake each other. And then Matt tackles Tyler and manages to like hold him down for a bit. Bonnie runs over to help, but then Tyler sends Matt storming off him and Bonnie hears his head hit a tree with the sound of a rotten melon bursting, which is so gross. And then Matt falls to the ground, like passed out. Bonnie is face to face with Tyler and he's got blood running down his face and she tries to reason with him. She's like, this is who I went to school with. This is a guy I danced with at prom. But his eyes are just pure cruelty. And then Meredith appears beside Bonnie holding Stefan's dagger and she tells him it's silver. He jumps at Meredith, but Bonnie hits him as hard as she can with a branch she's holding and knocks him out. She pulls him off Meredith and sees huge gaping wounds on her leg, and she can see he's clawed Meredith's leg nearly to the bone. Meredith is in shock and like pale, but she tells Bonnie she needs to tie it up with something. And Caroline appears and hands her a length of cord, and then they both sort of just sit next to each other. Bonnie ties Meredith's leg and then she turns to Caroline and tells her to wait with Meredith and Matt and to hold this stick and if Tyler even twitches to hit him as hard as she can. She goes to try and help Stefan. So she sees Klaus and Stefan fighting and Stefan seems to be holding his own and she even thinks Stefan is winning for a second. But then Klaus smiles and starts to push back and Klaus just keeps getting faster and grinning wider until he looks terrifying. Stefan is then lying down with Klaus looking down on him and he says he's tired of playing and it's time to die. He takes Stefan's stick and snaps it in half, throwing one half into the woods and the other against Stefan, jabbing him with such force that Stefan screams over and over. Bonnie is just watching. She knows Stefan's about to die, and suddenly, as Klaus starts to bring the stake down, a spear flies out of the woods and strikes him right in the middle of his back, and Bonnie hears a voice clearly say, "Get away from my brother." Klaus screams and blood froths out of his mouth. His face is twisted in fury, and he scrabbles trying to get the stake out, but he can't reach as Damon stalks out of the woods. And Damon says again, "Get away from my brother before I tear your heart out." In spite of all this, Klaus is still very strong and rushes at Damon, but Damon turns into a crow, and Klaus plunges right past where Damon had been stood and into the woods beyond the clearing. Bonnie runs to Stefan, but he's unconscious. She's never seen anyone as hurt as this, not even Mr. Tanner. Damon appears again, and she asks him if giving him blood will help, but Damon just looks really scared, and Damon says blood might help a little, but then Stefan whispers no. Damon says not to be stupid, but Stefan says it won't do any good. He tells Damon he needs to get Bonnie and the others out of here and they have to leave him. And Damon says he doesn't give a damn about their human lives, and Bonnie realises that this is true. There's only one life Damon cares about, and it's not his own. But Stefan says this is his last request. He says he has to promise, and Damon stares at him and then says, "I promise," and stands, telling Bonnie to come. He says the humans have to leave, but he'll come back. But before they can go, there's a crack and a flash, and Bonnie sees flames. Klaus and his lightning have returned. He's pulled the white ash stake out of his back and is raining lightning forks down on them, and there's flames everywhere. Damon rushes Klaus, and lightning catches him in mid-spring, and then Damon is down and lying motionless. And Bonnie looks with horror at Klaus and he says he's going to eat Stefan now. But Bonnie's all alone. She's the only one left. She kneels in front of Stefan and he tells her to get out of the way, but she says no. Klaus says, "Fine, you can die together," and Bonnie shouts Elena's name. She just screams it, draws on all her powers, but nothing happens. And then Bonnie sees mist creeping along the ground, but it's acting weirdly. It's like swirling and rising in the air like a whirlwind and gathering the shape of a man. And then she realizes more of them are appearing all around. Okay, so all these like spirits are appearing, and Bonnie says that it's the unquiet spirits because it's the solstice. The dead are forming around them from the cemetery and the woods, hundreds of them. She says she can see both Union and Confederate troops from the Civil War, and she can see adults and children, men and women. She says she's scared and feels like she's in a nightmare, but she also feels in awe. And then one figure is so bright and is floating in front of them closest to Klaus. Klaus faces this being of light hanging there, and it's Elena looking back at him. She tells him to stand away from them and that it's over now. Klaus says he's not afraid, they're already dead and he's an original, they can't hurt him and he's invincible. But Elena turns to others and tells them he wants to spill more blood here, and the soldiers start to talk and say too much blood has been shed and it's time to stop it. And they all move as one and bore down on Klaus, and like a wave they engulf him. And he fights, but he's quickly swallowed by all the mist and he's just pulled away in a tornado. And Bonnie asks where they're taking him, and Elena says where he won't do any harm. Tyler then appears at the side of the clearing crying and saying, "Don't let them take me," and he just runs into the woods. Elena and Stefan talk, and Bonnie's like, "Can't you do anything to help him?" But Elena looks gentle and really sad, and she says she can cure what Klaus did, but I can't cure what Catherine did. And she asks him if that's what he wants. He looks like he wants to say no, but Bonnie says he needs to go on trying, and he says yes, he wants her help. And so Elena kisses him, and a golden light engulfs him and heals him. She then goes to Meredith and kisses her, then Matt, and then Caroline. And she goes to Damon and kisses his head. And he sees Elena and goes still. She says her last gift is to make it rain and the fire is put out, and then she looks sad again and says she has to go. And Bonnie knows that this time she'll be going for good. Stefan says no and to wait a little longer, but she can't. She's being pulled backwards and they try to reach for each other but can't, and she looks pained as she's pulled back and the light winks out. Bonnie thinks this isn't fair, all they want is to be together, and her reward for saving them all is to be separated from Stefan forever. The clearing is silent, and then Stefan screams Elena with so much pain. Bonnie didn't see what happened, she just heard Stefan's cry, and then there's a golden flash. It was so bright that Bonnie's blinded briefly, and as her eyes adjust she sees something in the clearing, something small and trembling that looks like a slender naked girl. It looked like Elena. Not golden ghost Elena and not pale vampire Elena, a pink shivering Elena who looks bewildered as she looks around her. She says Bonnie, and it's a voice of a scared girl. Bonnie kneels and stares at her, and their fingers touch, and then Bonnie gasps and throws herself at Elena. She is solid and wet from the rain, and Bonnie's hands don't go through her. They're both gasping, and then Meredith interrupts them and ends up falling into their arms, and they all burst into tears. They hear Caroline give Elena her dress. I think she's got a slip-on underneath, and then she gives Elena her dress. She sort of whispers Stefan and gets up and takes a stumbling step towards him, and he stumbles towards her too, and then they fall to the ground together in each other's arms, and they don't say anything, and then they're just laughing, kissing. Bonnie says she's never been so happy in her life, and after a time Elena looks up and they all swarm around her. She hugged Caroline, held Matt's face, and then said Damon and held out her hand. And Damon looks down at them and says, "I'm not like you," but Matt says, "You're not as different as you think." He says he knows he didn't come here because of Bonnie's spell. He knows the hairs were all Stefan's. The only thing he doesn't know is why he didn't go in and save Vicky, and Damon snaps that he wasn't invited in. He says Tyler must have invited Klaus in. He says that night Klaus was in and the girl was dead before he even knew what was happening. He says he's not like them, but Lena and Stefan still hold their hands out to him. Bonnie says his name, and for a second she sees feeling in his eyes, but then he puts his guard back up, gives his jacket to Elena, and then turns and walks away. But the rest of them are so happy. Bonnie grabs Matt and they start dancing, and they grab Caroline and Meredith too, and for a long time the clearing is full of rejoicing. And that is the end of book 4. So Elena is back. Whether she's back as a human or not, we don't know yet. It doesn't seem like she's a vampire or a ghost anymore, but whether she's human, we don't know. I don't know if Klaus is dead, but he's been taken away. Klaus was weird, right? I thought he was a good, really unhinged villain at the end there. And yeah, that's sort of where it leaves off. Damon seems to have a little bit of a redemption arc in that last book, so I assume that will carry on in the next books. I'm gonna leave this video here for now because I am vampired out, but if you enjoyed this, if you got this far, I hope you enjoyed this. And let me know if you think I should do the next trilogy, because I've not started reading them yet, but I do have them. So if you want to know what happens next, let me know. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.